Local stories, local voices. We're localwebradio.fm.
The Semiahmoo Peninsula is an area rich in history. Join Gordie Hogg as we take a step back in today's past with candid and entertaining interviews. From the Big White Rock and train tracks along the promenade to the peaceful surroundings of Blackie Spit Park and Crescent Beach, learn the stories behind what grew us into the community we all call home.
Well, yes, this is your host, Eric Reynolds, and this is the Gordie Hogg Show, where we'll be talking with Gordie about memories past and stories present in White Rock and on the Semiahmoo Peninsula. I'm here today with Gordie Hogg, a longtime resident of the peninsula who also serves as our MLA, and today Gordie will be sharing his insights into the connection he has to the community. Now, before Gordie joins us, just as a reminder for our listeners that if you have questions, you can reach Gordie at his office at 604-542-3930 or on his website at www.gordonhoggmla.bc.ca. Well, Gordie, it's great to be talking with you today.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's a delight to be here.
Well, it's great.
Thank you very much.
I've got a few questions for you today. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. Let me ask you this, Gordie. Now, I understand you're very involved in the community. Now, Gordie, tell us what's so important and why you're doing this show.
Well, I guess sort of as an operating principle, I've always asked myself the question, how do we take care of each other? And as I think that's an important part of living in community, living in a province or a state or a country, that one of the issues is how do we look after each other? How do we care for each other? And one of the things that I think this show provides us with or provides me with, and hopefully others with, is an opportunity to ask that question of ourselves and to ask what we can do to look after, to support, to understand each other. Everything from the role of me as a neighbor, to me in a community, to within a family, and in my roles that I've had the privilege of playing within government, whether it was being the mayor of White Rock or the member of the Legislative Assembly. All of those rules that we make are broadly designed to say, how do we look after each other? How do we ensure that we put in place policies, regulations, and laws that allow us to get along better, allow us to work together, whether it's a taxation for the purposes of building a hospital and ensuring that we have health care, or whether it's a speed limit to ensure that people abide by a speed, which is going to ensure that everybody else is going to be safe. So it's about getting along. It's about ensuring that when we live in community or in society, that we can get along, and at the same time have the opportunity to express ourselves personally within that framework.
Well, Gordie, you've given us a great backdrop here. And I know that you live not just in this community now, but really almost your entire life. And have had a great deal of memories, of course, you'll be sharing in future podcasts. But, Gordie, tell us a bit about yourself for those that may have not have met you yet.
A little bit about myself. Well, Eric, I have lived in this community all of my life. I was actually came home from school, I think it was in grade 11, going to Semiahmoo High School, and I'd gone to White Rock Elementary School, and my mother said to me, gee, son, I read in the local paper that they're short Little League coaches. And I think that would be kind of neat if you could coach Little League. And I said, oh, gee, Mom, like I'm playing ball 4 nights a week. I'm way too busy to do that. And I've got football practices coming up. I just don't have time to do that. And she said, well, son, those people are coaching you. And the reason you can do that is because people have stepped up to coach. And I think you should consider that. So I talked to a couple of friends and said, we could do this after school. We don't have to do it at night when we're practicing. So I started doing that. And eventually we won the right to represent BC, British Columbia, in the Western Canadian Championships in Edmonton.
Really?
I was going to, it was a neat experience. I just loved coaching kids. We won the Western Canadian Championship, got to go to Edmonton. So the president of the league said, well, Gordie, you're going to have to go to a city council meeting to tell them what you're doing, and maybe they'll give you some pins or some money to help you take this group of kids to Edmonton. So I went to my first city council meeting, my first sort of encounter, I guess, with government, and was last on the agenda, and came home from that meeting and was sitting at our kitchen table, and I had a glass of milk and a peanut butter sandwich, and Mom walked into the kitchen and said, "Well, how'd it go, son?" I said, "Oh, Mom, it was old people making stupid decisions. We were last on the agenda." And I should parenthetically add that she, after a few years, came to say that I became one of those old people making stupid decisions as we were part of that. But she stopped in the kitchen, she looked at me, and she said, "You know, son, I'd always hoped I'd raised you to be the kind of person, like, if you didn't like something, instead of complaining about it, you'd actually get engaged and try and make a difference." So I had that sort of rolling in my head for a number of months and a period of time. And I said, "Well, I'll show you. I'll run for city council." And I did. While I was going to UBC, I ran for city council and was elected. And I think that when I showed up for my first meeting, I think they thought, well, they probably thought they were electing my father because he was a well-known family physician in the area. But I was sort of, I guess, in some ways, living out what my mom had sort of planted in me. So that was sort of led to sort of the community connection. So from that, I've been on the board of probably 10 or 12 nonprofit societies in the community, been involved in a number of on the hospital board, and in just a myriad of ways that I've had the privilege of engaging the community, including my wife and I being foster parents for children for young adults for a number of years. We were billets for their Junior A hockey team, the Surrey Eagles, for about 12 years. So I feel really blessed and fortunate to have grown up and lived in this community and being able to have the different connections that I've been privileged to have. It's really been a great community to grow up in. But I guess juxtaposed with that and some of the issues, we recently had the Vancouver Foundation looked at Metro Vancouver and asked the question in a number of surveys as to what was important, what was the most important issue facing our community, facing our Metro Vancouver. And they thought people were going to come back with things like, well, it's poverty. Some people are in poverty. Some people are homelessness, or whether it's some social ills. But to their surprise, the two biggest issues that came out, or the single biggest issue, I guess, was the sense of isolation that some people felt, the sense of disconnection, and almost that some people were starting to live in silos, and the silos could have been based on culture or age or income or ethnicity, but all kinds of those things. And I think that was a bit of a surprise to all of us that was actually going on. So we actually tried to look at that a little more closely in the South Surrey White Rock area, and the issues that came up were not terribly different. Inclusion, a sense of inclusion and belonging, certainly came up again at the top of the list. Health and well-being and poverty was also an issue in that. So I think when you look at sort of some of the national trends, where the people who feel safest in their homes are the people that can name more of their neighbors. The more neighbors you can name, the safer you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't feel so disconnected then.
That's right, and that sense of isolation and support that comes from that. So that's clearly an important determinant, and the sense of belonging to a community is one of the most important determinants of life satisfaction in terms of how you feel within your community. And certainly adolescent connectedness or adolescent social connectedness
absolutely
it's a far better predictor of a sense of well-being than academic performance. Yet we seem to, as societies, place this great emphasis on academic performance, yet it doesn't have as nearly as strong a correlation as social connectedness does for children and adolescents in terms of their satisfaction with life growing up. And I guess certainly in Canada, with sort of going back to look at the notion of social capital, that historically 100 years ago, when people lived on, we had great prairie development and a great agrarian society and farms that people used to get together at grain elevators and general stores and talk about what's happening, and we better go help with Joe because his barn burnt down, so we'll go help him build a new barn. That there was that social center, that connectedness that happened in communities. And a lot of European countries or European cities have the city square where where everybody can meet and talk to each other and deal with that. But between 1885 and 1910, with a lot of immigration, a lot of urbanization, and a lot of industrialization, all of that sense of social connectedness disappeared as people moved into cities and became more industrialized workplaces that were much more regimented and much more immigration. So between 1885 and 1910, virtually all of the service clubs came into existence, whether it's Rotary or Kiwanis or Elks clubs, and all Little League, Boy Scouts, Girl Guides came into existence. And it came into existence, and the belief is they were there to create that same thing that happened around the general store or the grain elevator. Right. So I think we're now looking at suburbanization. So we've lost some of that again. All of that peaked by the mid-1950s. We saw the highest rates of participation, but that seems to be dropping again now. And the way sociologists kind of look at our communities, look at South Surrey, White Rock, and areas all across North America, in terms of their level of social engagement, they look at the level of participation in faith-based organizations, whether they're churches or mosques or synagogues or temples. They look at the level of participation in workplace-based organizations, whether it's a union or a professional organization of some sort, and the level of participation in power structures, whether it's a service club or a political party, and those types of engagements. And all three of those reached their peaks in the mid-1950s and have been dropping off consistently since then. In fact, at a very local sense, the research is showing that we've seen a decline in social capital. And again, social capital just being that relationship that we have with each other and that sense of connectedness. It's dropped over the past 35 years. We've seen about a 58% reduction in the people who are attending clubs and going to meetings once a month. Wow. We've seen a 43% reduction in people who are having family dinners. And
really?
Yeah, and even having friends over to your place, hosting people, that's dropped by something like 35%. So what are the things that we need to look at so that we can feel connected? I think this notion of suburban, submetro issues is people, I think, in many cases drive home and push a button and their garage door opens and they go and close the garage door. So they may have lots of neighbors, but they're not connecting with them. So I guess it's in many ways things don't look different if you're looking at the geography and looking at the landscape, but things feel different because you may not know your neighbor, you may not have those connections, and the fabric of connections with each other, I think, is sort of, as that reduces, that becomes more problematic. I think the fabric of our connections are really about how we enrich our lives, enrich our communities, and enrich our sense of well-being. And I think we understand that more as we understand more of our connectedness with our history, the stories of our communities. I think they give us a good grasp for where we are today and perhaps why we're there, and give us a greater sense of hope for the future in terms of how we continue to connect with each other and to care for each other.
And Gordie, it seems like that connection has been so important to you since an early age. I mean, even back at, I think you said at Semiahmoo High when you were, coaching Little League through the, board member of the hospital and the nonprofits and the council member and mayor. That seems to be kind of a running theme with you. But I've got one more question I want to ask. But before we do that, I do need to take a real quick commercial break. So for our listeners, we'll be right back with Gordie Hogg. And after the break, we'll talk about Gordie's service to the community over the years. We'll be right back.
More with Gordie Hogg after a word from our sponsors.
Shopping for the lowest mortgage rate? Looking to refinance?
Catch the Mortgage Newscast with Jared Dreyer
on the Business Channel
on localwebradio.fm.
If you're struggling with a dental or oral health issue, be sure to catch the Healthy Smiles